New Year's Eve, 2024, was supposed to be a fresh start after a tough year. Around 9 p.m., I started hearing strange noises outside, branches snapping and a low, crunching sound like someone walking on the snow. The area was known for deer and the occasional bear, so I shrugged it off. But when the sound moved closer to the cabin, I couldn't ignore it. I grabbed a flashlight and went to the front window. The beam of light cut through the darkness, but all I saw were snowflakes swirling in the wind. Still, the sound persisted, now coming from the back of the cabin. My heart pounded as I moved to the kitchen window. Again, nothing. I locked all the doors and tried to convince myself I was just being paranoid. But then, at 10 p.m., I heard a loud knock on the front door. My cabin was miles from the nearest neighbor, and no one knew I had moved in except for a few friends. I hesitated before approaching the door. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no response, just another knock, slow and deliberate. I peered through the peephole, but no one was there. My stomach churned as I backed away from the door. The knocking stopped, and for a moment there was silence. Then I heard it. A faint, raspy voice whispering from the other side of the door. "Let me in," I froze, gripping my phone tightly. When I finally gathered the courage to look through the peephole again, I saw a figure. A man dressed in a tattered coat and hat stood in the snow, staring straight ahead. His face was obscured by shadows, but his presence felt wrong, unnatural. "Go away!" I shouted, my voice cracking. The man didn't move. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if amused, and whispered again, "Let me in." Panicked, I called the police. While I was on the phone, the man began tapping on the window next to the door, his silhouette now visible through the frosted glass. He pressed his hand against the pane, smearing it with some dark substance. My heart raced as the operator assured me that a patrol car was on the way. By the time the police arrived, the man was gone. The officers found footprints in the snow leading around the cabin, but they stopped abruptly at the edge of the woods as if he had vanished into thin air. They searched the area but found no trace of him. The next morning I noticed something chilling. On the glass where he had pressed his hand, there was a faint smeared outline of the words, "Happy New Year." The dark substance turned out to be ash, mixed with what the officers later said might have been blood. I left the cabin a week later. Whatever peace I had been searching for was replaced by a lingering fear. Even now, I can't hear the phrase "Happy New Year" without picturing that handprint and wondering who or what had come to visit me that night. New Year's Eve, 2024, was supposed to be uneventful. I had just moved into a small rental house on the outskirts of Colorado Springs. It wasn't much, just a cozy, one-story home with creaky wooden floors and a backyard that stretched into a dense patch of trees. The rent was cheap, and I didn't mind being away from the city's chaos. The day passed quietly. I unpacked some boxes, played music, and tried to make the place feel like home. As the evening rolled in, I decided to celebrate with a glass of wine and a classic movie. The house felt drafty, with a faint whistle of wind sneaking through the windows, but I didn't pay much attention. It was just an old house after all. Around 10 p.m., I noticed something odd. The motion-activated light in the backyard flickered on. It wasn't unusual for deer to wander near, so I brushed it off. But when it happened a second time, I felt a twinge of unease. I went to the window and peered out, but all I saw was the faint outline of the trees swaying in the wind. An hour later, as fireworks started to echo faintly in the distance, I heard a sound. Soft footsteps crunching in the snow. I froze, straining to listen. The noise stopped abruptly, as if someone knew I was aware. I grabbed my phone and texted my friend Ryan, who lived a few miles away. "Weird noises outside. Could just be animals, but it's creeping me out." Ryan texted back, "Want me to swing by?" I was about to respond when the sound returned, louder this time. It was coming from the backyard. I moved to the back door and turned on the porch light. The yard looked undisturbed, except for a faint trail of footprints leading from the edge of the trees toward the house. My pulse quickened. The footprints didn't lead back to the woods. They stopped abruptly a few feet from the porch. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously opened the door, shining the beam across the yard. Nothing, just the footprints in the snow. I locked the door and went back to the living room, where I tried to focus on the movie. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I texted Ryan again. "If you're free, maybe come by. I think someone's messing around outside." Minutes later, I heard a faint tapping sound coming from the kitchen. I froze. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. It was coming from the small window above the sink. Slowly, I approached, my breath catching in my throat. When I peeked out, my blood ran cold. A pale face was pressed against the glass, lips curled into a faint smile. It was a man, his eyes wide and unblinking. I stumbled back, fumbling for my phone. The tapping turned into banging. I called Ryan, whispering into the phone, "Someone's outside! He's at the kitchen window!" Ryan told me to call the police, but before I could, the banging stopped. When I dared to look again, the window was empty. The man was gone. A few minutes later, Ryan arrived. We checked the backyard together, but the footprints had vanished, as if swept away. There was no sign of the man. The police arrived shortly after, but found nothing out of place. They suggested it was a prank or my imagination, but I knew better. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I found something that made my stomach turn. A single smudged handprint on the outside of the kitchen window. Whoever he was, he had been there, watching. I moved out a month later. To this day, I can't shake the image of his face pressed against the glass, staring as if he was waiting for something or someone. It was New Year's Eve 2024, and I had agreed to dog sit for my coworker Eric while he celebrated the holiday in the city. Eric's dog, a small and quiet husky mix named Luna, was easy to care for. Walk her twice, feed her, and make sure she didn't get into trouble. It was an easy way to earn some extra cash, and since I wasn't much for parties, it suited me just fine. Eric lived in a quiet neighborhood about 20 minutes from my apartment. I packed an overnight bag, planning to stay in his guest room. I spent the evening playing some games on my laptop and watching a movie while Luna rested at my feet. Around 9:30 p.m., I heard the doorbell ring. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, a woman in her early 30s stood there. She wore a heavy winter coat and clutched a scarf tightly around her neck. "I'm Eric's girlfriend," she said, smiling nervously. "I left something in his room last time I was here. Do you mind if I grab it?" Eric hadn't mentioned a girlfriend, but her confidence threw me off. Sure," I said. "I'll get it for you." "No need," she interrupted, stepping inside. "I know exactly where it is." I watched as she climbed the stairs and entered Eric's room. She left the door slightly ajar. Uneasy, I texted Eric to ask about the woman. He didn't respond immediately, and by the time she came back downstairs, still clutching her scarf, I hadn't heard back. She smiled again, thanked me, and left without saying much else. Moments later, Eric called. "What are you talking about? I don't have a girlfriend," he said, his voice laced with alarm. My stomach dropped as I described the woman to him. He told me to check his room for anything missing. Everything seemed intact, but Eric's unease didn't settle. "Lock all the doors and call me if she comes back," he said before hanging up. I spent the rest of the evening trying to shake the feeling of dread. Just after midnight, my girlfriend Natalie arrived. I recounted the strange encounter, and she was equally unsettled. Then came the knock at the door. Luna perked up immediately, growling low in her throat. Whoever it was didn't ring the bell this time, just knocked persistently. I checked the peephole, but no one was there. When I opened the door, a crack. The cold winter air rushed in, but the street was empty. "That's creepy," Natalie said, pulling her sweater tighter around her. We retreated to the guest room, locking the door behind us. Luna lay at the foot of the futon, still growling intermittently. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps outside the bedroom door. Natalie stirred beside me as Luna began to growl louder, now standing and staring intently at the door. Then the doorknob jiggled. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaky. A woman's voice responded, chillingly calm. "It's me." Opened the door. Natalie clutched my arm, whispering, "Is that her?" I grabbed my phone and called the police, speaking quietly as I gave them the address. Meanwhile, the woman outside the door began knocking softly. "I know you're in there," she said, her tone turning menacing. I shouted, "The cops are on their way." For a moment, silence. Then hurried footsteps retreated down the stairs. I heard the front door open and slam shut. Minutes later, the police arrived. They found no sign of the woman, but the front door's lock had been tampered with. When Eric returned the next day, I recounted everything. He admitted he suspected the woman was an old acquaintance who had become unhinged. He promised to change the locks immediately. The unsettling part? A key was missing from his room. To this day, I wonder how close we came to a far worse ending that night.